Hi, I'm Terry Kolath. I'm here today with Professor Adrian Kerr. And in our summer semester, we're moving on to the story of Burma, the land of temples, a two-session course. Thank you for joining me, Professor Kerr.
It's always a pleasure to be here, Terry.
Now, Burma, this is really interesting. Two sessions starting out talking about how beautiful and how peaceful it is, and coming up to the Rohingya. So how are you going to do this?
Burma is one of these marvelous ancient civilizations that grew up along the rivers which flow north to south. The Burmese people don't exist. They're a patchwork of different groups, different tribes and different ethnic communities. It's probably the most split country in Southeast Asia. The Burmese people that we call Burmese today are the majority, but they only make up about 60% of the total population. And the other populations live on the outskirts of the main river delta and the capital cities. They came in, we think, from southern China. And they moved into Laos, and then they kept on moving down the rivers until they found the fertile valleys in central Burma. The word Burma, of course, is an old colonial term, and it has a modern name, but they basically mean the same thing. One is a verbal way of mentioning the country, the other one is a written way, so we can mix them up. But we'll call it Burma for simplicity. And the great period of Burmese history was the founding of the Bagan Empire. And if you ever go to Bagan today, which is halfway up the country, so to speak, from Rangoon in the south to Mandalay in the north, it's about in the middle, and it was based on the river, and there you can see the finest, largest set of Buddhist temples in the world. There are bigger single temples, but this is the largest number. Some people have counted 1,000 temples. And you, if you're fortunate and spend $400, you can get a balloon ride from one end of the valley to the other, and you fly about 100 feet above the temples, and so that all of this landscape is open to you, and you can take pictures, and you can see these temples from the air, which is quite a unique experience.
You did that?
I haven't done that. I've done it by foot. I've done the poor man's version.
Oh my gosh, by foot?
Because I spend more time on each temple, and there are two groups of temples. One is the royal temple, or the nobles' temples, and they were magnificent structures covered in gold paint or gold plate with jeweled tops and great works of art on the walls and fantastic statues of the Buddha, which are still there today. Marvelous. Now, many of them are falling down and they're being constantly rebuilt, but the earthquake 2 years ago has devastated those great temples, and we're having to start again. But the majority of temples are village temples or town temples, and there, for instance, Shell Point would cough up and they would build a modest temple for the people for Shell Point to go and worship. And so you find dozens and dozens and dozens of small temples, quite modest, but they were designed for the people of the village nearby. And it's the same thing today. You have, each village will have its own Buddhist temple. Burma and Thailand have the highest concentration of Buddhism, probably around about 80 to 90% are very strict Buddhist. And so you see these individual temples being built, and you'll see a very poor farming village with a lovely little temple, and then you go inside and you'll see a statue of the Buddha. And people today will save up their money to buy a piece of gold leaf to go and place on the Buddha's statue, and then you can ask for luck. And people will do that today. They have no money, they're in poor clothes, they're simple peasants, farmers, and yet they'll save up all their spare money to buy a piece of gold foil the size of your thumbnail, and they'll push it onto the Buddha statue, and that's common practice today.
Interesting.
So the empire got bigger and bigger until it was defeated or threatened by the Mongols coming down from China, and so it effectively was depopulated and has been left for us today, which is a treasure. It was never destroyed, it was evacuated.
And in session 2, we discuss immigration, the ethnic differences, and socialism and ethnic cleansing, the military takeover. Suu Kyi?
Yep, Suu Kyi. It all came to a point when Britain extended out of India into what is now Bangladesh, and then they moved down the coast into Burma. The problem was that the King of Burma at the time was harassing the British farmers on the other side of the border, and so the Brits decided to invade. There were 2 wars against Burma, and of course they didn't stand a chance with the military equipment and the organization of the British Army, and so whether Britain wanted to or not, they ended up running Burma. And they had the difficult task of trying to run the government and satisfy the outlying populations who weren't Burmese. And they favored the Burmese, the more industrious, the more unified, and so the outer fringes, the other ethnic groups, got pushed out. When independence came and Britain left, and Suu Kyi's father became the leader, he promised the people that if he was supported, then he would allow them to leave Burma if they didn't feel they're being represented. He was murdered. He didn't last long, and the army took over, and it's run by the army ever since. The great hopes for Burma was that Suu Kyi, his daughter, would actually bring democracy to Burma, and after a couple of failed attempts, it seemed that 2 or 3 years ago that although she could not become the leader because she had the bad manners to be married to an Englishman who was, both of them were at English universities, and their children were therefore half English, that prohibited her under the Constitution from becoming the leader. So she became a leader in the sidelines, which she is to this day, and when President Obama went to see her, I was there at the same time, accidentally. You know, he made a great fuss that here's a leader of democracy and what great things lie ahead for Burma. Well, sadly, looking back over the last 2 or 3 years, it's been a disaster in that the army still control Burma, and she is tiptoeing around the army, trying to satisfy them, but also trying to modernize the country, but with very little success. And she's been heavily criticized in the last 6 months of not stepping in to, as you mentioned, protect the minorities, of which the most high-profile minorities are Rohingya. The story of the Rohingya were that they were Islamic folk which came in from Bangladesh area, which is Islamic, and they moved into Burma and in the 19th century, and they grew in numbers, and they are not indigenous people, and furthermore they're Islamic and they're clearly not Buddhist. They actually were never given civil status. They were always migrant workers, not too dissimilar from the illegals in the United States, of which there are 10 million. And we have an issue of how do we deal with those? And we're quite a civilized country, so we're still debating on how to deal with those. But in Burma, the extreme views of the Buddhist group and the army is that they shouldn't be living there, and they're growing in number, and it's in the northwest of the country, and they have conducted some absolutely terrible events on the villages of the Rohingya, and so much so that many of the Rohingya people have now gone illegally over the border, and the Burmese government would be happy if they stayed there. And they're basically trying to drive these foreigners out. The Rohingya say, we've been here for 100 years, you know, we're part of the country, and technically they're illegal, and the issue continues today. And the West has now gone from looking at Suu Kyi as being the great hope, the democratic leader to bring modernization to Burma, to a failed leader. So we shall see what happens.
Oh, well, you can join Professor Kerr to understand more in depth what's going on in Burma today in Session 2 after you spend some time in Session 1 learning about the wonderful history.